Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Whether you're listening to this live or in your own time, my name is Luke Carruthers, and welcome to the first episode of a brand new podcast, Escaping Through the Lens. What is Escaping Through the Lens, I hear some of you asking? It's a show where I take you from the world of today into a world of discussion about films and TV series, whether it be from my own personal choice or recommendations from you listening in. We're going to have plenty of these to look at. Some will be good, some will be bad, and some will be straight down the middle. But there's one thing I want you to take note from this, is that I'm not a professional film reviewer. So if there are any opinions I share that you don't agree with, that's absolutely fine, but don't take what I say too seriously. I mean, I wouldn't take what I say too seriously. There will be plenty of opinions shared, fun facts given, and plenty of laughs to be had every Friday, 6 till 7, or again, whenever you want to listen to this in your free time, as it is a pre-recorded podcast. So, let's get started with the first three films of discussion for today's episode, the original Star Wars trilogy. So, it's no secret that Star Wars is one of the most recognisable franchises of today's media. Coming from film director George Lucas, in 1977 he pushed what filming technology he had to its limits and beyond them at the time, writing and directing one of the most iconic films of all time, along with providing the story for two sequels afterwards. In preparation for this podcast, I watched all three films: Episode 4, A New Hope, Episode 5, The Empire Strikes Back, and Episode 6, Return of the Jedi. Just to be clear, I am not a huge Star Wars fan in any sense. I am just a casual fan. Including last week, I've only ever seen the original trilogy twice in my whole life. In fact, before last week, I watched the original trilogy 5 years ago when my dad showed me and my sister these films for the first time before we went to go and see The Force Awakens in cinema, so I have no nostalgia for these films whatsoever. Does that make me appreciate these films any less? No, I still think these films are fantastic. I just don't gush over them like so many other people do. And I figured what better way to start off the podcast than with a legendary trilogy of films. I'll also be doing episodes on the prequel trilogy and the sequel trilogy after this one, so get ready for that next week. Oh, and I'm also looking at the original broadcasted films from their release dates back in 1977, 1980 and 1983, not the special editions, because I don't want to have to watch these films when there's poorly rendered out-of-place CGI pasted over the films just because it just looks so out of place. Also, because even as a casual, I know Han shot first. Which is actually a good time to mention that there will be spoilers in this podcast, so if you haven't seen these films, I just thought I'd let you know. Alright, let's begin with Episode 4, A New Hope.
Darth Vader, only you could be so bold.
The Imperial Senate will not sit still for this. When they hear you've attacked a diplomatic...
Don't act so surprised, Your Highness. You weren't on any mercy mission this time. Several transmissions were beamed to the ship by rebel spies. I want to know what happened to the plans they sent you.
I don't know what you're talking about. I'm a member of the Imperial Senate on a diplomatic mission to Alderaan.
You are part of the Rebel Alliance and a traitor. Take her away!
There is a war spreading across the galaxy between the rebels led by Princess Leia and the evil Empire led by Darth Vader. One of their fights revolves around the rebels stealing the plans of the Empire's newly built weapon, the Death Star, a space station with the power to annihilate entire planets. The Empire break aboard their getaway ship, fight their way through the rebels, and capture Princess Leia, but not before she's able to put the Death Star plans inside a tiny droid named R2-D2, who escapes to the planet Tatooine with another droid named C-3PO. Upon landing, they encounter a farm boy, Luke Skywalker, who helps them find the person on Tatooine they're tasked with delivering the plans to, Obi-Wan Kenobi, an old hermit living in the desert who used to be a Jedi Knight, a warrior armed with a lightsaber and mastered use of a mysterious power called the Force. More on that later. With aided transport from smuggler Han Solo and a Wookiee named Chewbacca, they venture out across the galaxy to rescue Princess Leia to get the plans to the rebel base in order to figure out how to destroy the Death Star and defeat the Empire. Now, this story is very entertaining and clever in how it's told, but it is not perfect. Thankfully, the good moments outweigh the bad moments, so overall it's a well-written piece. The first highlight of the film is its opening. After the iconic episode title crawl and the epic music, we're thrown right into the action with the rebels fighting off the Empire as they try to escape. If this were a standard story of the hero rising up to save the day, we would start the film from Luke's perspective as he is living his life with his auntie and his uncle farming on Tatooine before R2-D2 and C-3PO are sold to his uncle by the Tusken Raiders, from which Luke would learn about the message for Obi-Wan and the war taking place among the stars. A Star War, if you will. Get used to that, guys. Get used to this kind of humour. But no, we're thrown right into the thick of it, and immediately we, the audience, can tell which side is which. The short and plucky rebels, armed with nothing but their lasers and their helmets, led by the dressed in pure white Princess Leia, are the good guys. And the heavily armoured stormtroopers, led by the tall and imposing black-suited Darth Vader, are the bad guys. So we already know what's going on right off the bat, all without much dialogue. A film that can do that within the first few minutes is definitely worthy of praise. Another clever thing this film does is how Obi-Wan and Darth Vader introduce us to the concept of Jedi Knights and the Force, when Luke asks how his dad was killed.
For over 1,000 generations, the Jedi Knights were the guardians of peace and justice in the Old Republic. Before the Dark Times. Before the Empire.
How did my father die?
A young Jedi named Darth Vader, who was a pupil of mine until he turned to evil, helped the Empire hunt down and destroy the Jedi Knights. He betrayed and murdered your father. Now the Jedi are all but extinct. Vader was seduced by the dark side of the Force.
The Force?
Now, the Force is what gives the Jedi his power. It's an energy field created by all living things. It surrounds us and penetrates us. It binds the galaxy together.
At this point, we're only teased about the Force, and throughout the rest of the film, we're only ever shown small abilities of what can be done. We see the wiser, more knowledgeable sides of the Force from Obi-Wan when he hypnotises the stormtroopers and tells Luke to rely on instinct in battle, broadening his mind, whilst also seeing the more ruthless dark side of the Force from Darth Vader as he uses it to nearly choke one of his Empire's officers. We're shown very little of what the Force can do so that the later films can expand the capabilities of what can be done with it. To jump ahead a little bit, think about what we know about the Force from the whole trilogy. Now imagine that the abilities that came from using the Force were what we only saw in A New Hope. That would not only severely limit the possibilities, but it would also make fans of the film say, "What are you talking about? Like, the Force can't let you lift rocks or lift spaceships with your mind. The Force can't let you shoot lightning from your hands or let you see ghosts." Trying to squeeze all of those abilities into the first film would make the film feel incredibly overstuffed, at a time when the production crew was already pushing themselves to their limits to get the film brought onto the big screen in the first place. The audience only needs to know so much in one film, and A New Hope nails it while showing and telling us not everything, but enough. Oh, speaking of the production, this to me is one of the most fascinating films to look into how it was made. I know that's more of a behind-the-scenes aspect rather than the story, but it still deserves the utmost respect in how such changes affected the story. I've studied media personally for 3 years at college before coming here to university, and having studied it, I see films and TV shows in a whole new light. Instead of saying, yeah, this is very fun to watch, this is boring, wait, what's going on? I'm left glued to the screen saying, wow, I wonder how they got this shot and that shot. Whoa, how did they make the colours look so good? Wow, they really did leave that coffee cup in shot. That's lazy. And one of my favourite things to do is see how they did everything shown on screen and read fun facts from what could have been or what was supposed to happen but had to be cut out. Like, for example, George Lucas had to pay a $2,000 fine for using the title crawl, which was copyrighted by a pre-existing film at the time. A payment which I think ultimately worked in the film's favour, as it gave us something that is now immediately recognisable in the franchise. Oh, there's also a bunch of deleted scenes that were meant to add more to the story, like Luke talking with his friends before they say goodbye to him as they set off to the academy. Many scenes were deleted and changed as per George Lucas's request, as he didn't actually like the final film that was made. This actually explains why he decided to re-release the original trilogy with some of the deleted scenes intact and, as mentioned before, additional CGI animated effects. As I mean, actual quality notwithstanding, it's fascinating to think George was so invested in his creation to go over and correct what he wanted to correct, which I think gives the film personality. Last but definitely not least important, when it comes to how the story is told, it builds upon action scene after action scene that happens. A common fact that comes from when writing a story is if your story ever goes, this happens, and then this happens, then it doesn't feel natural. The story has to go either this happens, therefore this happens, or this happens, but this happens. I'm going to use the scene where we're first introduced to Obi-Wan as an example. It goes like this. So, R2-D2 goes out into the desert to find Obi-Wan, therefore, Luke and C-3PO go out to find him, but Luke is attacked by the Sand People and knocked unconscious, but he is saved in the nick of time by who he knows to be Ben Kenobi, therefore, he discovers Ben Kenobi and Obi-Wan Kenobi are the same person. A New Hope doesn't just almost have every scene in the film play out like this, but the events that happen leave enough of an impact for the story to feel like we've witnessed an event happen, both with upsides and consequences. Luke, for example, loses both his home, his auntie and his uncle when the Empire invade the farm and kills them, as well as losing Obi-Wan later when he fights off Vader to give him and the team enough time to escape, but he gains the chance to travel the galaxy with the Rebellion and gains Han Solo, Chewbacca, Leia, R2-D2 and C-3PO as new friends. Obi-Wan, as just mentioned, loses his life in his duel with Vader, but he gains the power to guide Luke as a spiritual voice. Leia loses her home planet to the Death Star during her interrogation, but she too also gains allies for the Rebellion, etc, etc. To me, this is very important for a film story to do, because if not done, it just feels like you're watching characters move from one place to another with no purpose or consequence. Something I will bring up again when I talk about The Empire Strikes Back, which... oh boy, that's gonna be a doozy. Anyway, I would like to mention the story problems that I have with A New Hope now. One of these problems I also have coincide with the next two films, so I'll save that for when I conclude this podcast with Return of the Jedi. But specifically for A New Hope, there are plenty of inconsistencies. I may have just praised A New Hope for how it told a story with using the therefore structure and the but structure. That sounded weird. However, there are moments that feel like they happen just so the plot can happen. For instance, in the opening, R2-D2 and C-3PO are captured by the Tusken Raiders to be sold off to other people living in the desert. And call me skeptical, but I find it quite convenient that they just so happen to come across the farm where Luke lives first. Because if they had run into any other travellers or farms out in the desert that wanted to buy R2-D2, the Death Star plans would be in the wrong hands, and neither Luke nor Obi-Wan would have gone to rescue Leia, pretty much securing her death on the Death Star. Also, when we see the Death Star fire for the first time, we see it takes around 8 seconds to charge before it destroys the planet Alderaan. But later in the final battle, when Luke is making the trench run to blow up the Death Star, the charge time is noticeably longer, which feels like it's just long enough for Luke to fire the photon torpedoes. There is another instance when Leia survives her interrogation, to which Vader orders for her to be executed. Then our heroes take a noticeable amount of time to arrive in the Millennium Falcon, to which Vader then changes his mind, in which Leia could have already been executed because he has to make sure it was immediate. And need I mention the Stormtroopers and the biggest nitpick when it comes to them? I mean, as soldiers who are built up by Obi-Wan to be precise killers.
And these last points, too accurate for Sand People. Only Imperial Stormtroopers are so precise.
Aside from the opening scene when they kill the rebels on board their spaceship, they never hit anyone or anything throughout the rest of the film, or the later films now that I think about it. But I think I can let that nitpick slide, seeing as the fact that they never hit their targets is a running joke in the community, and it's funny. Now to summarise, so that I have time to talk about the other films, there is the visuals and the music to discuss, but I'll save that until I've talked about the others in a combined section. So all in all, A New Hope is a fantastic film that is enjoyable from beginning to end, if not without its shortcomings. It goes the extra mile in its detail, trying to create the most engaging story for the time it was released that still holds up in today's world. There is a reason why it is often analysed by teachers and used in film lessons, not just because of the franchise it created, but the impact it left on cinema, if, again, not without its story issues that are quite often overlooked by some. It's the first film in the series, and it sure does feel like it, but at no point does the film ever let that be seen as a flaw. Now time for the big one, what is considered to be not just the best in the original trilogy, not just the Star Wars film fans collectively love the most, but is also considered one of the best sequels ever made. Episode 5, The Empire Strikes Back.
Han, get up here.
Come on, Chewie!
Asteroids.
Chewie, set 271.
What are you doing? You're not actually going into an asteroid field.
They'd be crazy to follow us, wouldn't they?
You don't have to do this to impress me.
Sir, the possibility of successfully navigating an asteroid field is approximately 3,720 to 1.
Never tell me the odds.
So, with the Death Star destroyed, the rebels should stand more of a chance against the Empire, right? Well, not exactly. The sheer frontal force of the Empire has pushed the rebels into hiding on the remote ice planet Hoth. After an Imperial droid finds their base, the rebels barely escape their attack to the far end of the galaxy, except for Han, Leia, C-3PO and Chewbacca, who are unable to jump to lightspeed on board the unrepaired Millennium Falcon, forcing them to try and outrun the Empire itself. Meanwhile, unaware of the danger his friends are in, Luke travels with R2-D2 to the planet Dagobah as instructed by the now ghost of Obi-Wan to learn the ways of the Force from Yoda, the Jedi Master who instructed Obi-Wan. I'll come back to this when I get to Phantom Menace next week with the prequels. All the while, Darth Vader, while still in pursuit of the Falcon, plots a trap to turn Luke into an ally of the Empire. So it's up to Luke to learn the ways of the Force in time to rescue his friends without letting himself fall to the dark side. Now, the biggest thing that this film does well in terms of its story is how different the characters are, whilst still having the characteristics that we loved them for in the previous film. Luke is still the naive but well-meaning optimist, but throughout the film he learns to be more patient as he's taught how to truly connect with the Force. But he still lets his naivety get in the way on occasions, which opens the door for more development in the next film. Han Solo and Leia are obviously the most notable in character development as they start to form a romantic bond. I mean, I would call it development, but I don't think a whole lot is done with it. I mean, yeah, they start to open up to each other a bit more, but it only really happens when they have their first kiss. For the rest of the time, Han is still the risk-taking, grumpy pilot, and Leia is still the kind but battle-hardened general that we both know from their previous outing. But nothing else really comes out of their relationship until towards the end when Han is frozen in carbonite, which, I'll be honest, gave way to one of the most quotable moments in the film.
I love you.
No.
In terms of the Force, as I previously mentioned, the film takes the Force and builds upon it in a fantastic way. It's depicted as a power accessible to those who reach out with their emotions, but while doing so, are able to concentrate enough to lift objects around them and rely on battle instincts while not letting their emotions control them, more specifically anger or fear. Now, this is an ideal way to create a superpower in a film. You give it possibilities as to what can be done with it, but give it detriments which make it a challenge to overcome and understand, which is what Luke does. He slowly learns how to use the Force, but he doesn't master it straight away. Another thing to note is how the Force is not made out to be a power only certain people are born with, making them out to be the Chosen One or a living prophecy. And again, I'll come back to that when I get to Phantom Menace. I'm pretty sure a lot of you already know what I mean by that, but oh boy. Oh, and it also gives us another one of the most quotable lines from the film that can also be applied to real life.
Master, moving stones around is one thing. This is totally different.
No different. Only different in your mind. You must unlearn what you have learned.
All right, I'll give it a try.
No, try not. Do. Or do not. There is no try.
Perhaps the most striking positive is how it develops and creates a fear of the almighty villain that is Darth Vader. In A New Hope, Darth Vader is shown as the leader of the Empire, as a man of authority, but nothing much else. He's definitely seen as a threat, but the threat is only really felt with his control of the Empire and how mostly everyone follows his command without question. It's only with him choking an overly confident officer, his brief duel with Obi-Wan and defending the Death Star in a TIE fighter that we see glimmers of what his power can do. In Empire Strikes Back, however, with the Death Star destroyed, he is a lot more ruthless in his actions and much less held back with his power. He uses the Force to choke commanding officers to death when one fails at capturing the Millennium Falcon, and he stops laser shots from Han using just his hand before taking his gun away like it's nothing. Then, in his final duel with Luke, while he still has the ideal to turn him to his side, he never gives Luke time to breathe, overwhelms him with his superior knowledge of the Force, and even cuts off his hand, getting to a point where, while Luke is still able to escape, it's a very narrow one, leading to, as we all know, the biggest plot twist in cinema, which blew everybody away when they first saw it, except me. Because when I was a kid and I didn't know what Star Wars was, people would say the line to me out of context because I have the same name as the main character. So when I asked for context, they would say it was from Star Wars, and so the biggest plot twist in the history of films was spoiled to me by accident. Thank you very much, world. It's still a very impactful scene, don't get me wrong. I don't dislike it, I very much enjoy it. But speaking of things that I don't like about this film, alright. Do I want to do this? Alright, let's do it. Now, before I say what I want to say next, I should say this is probably the most controversial thing I will ever have said on this podcast, and this is only episode 1, so this will lead to some very strong first opinions of me. My aim isn't to massively upset Star Wars fans, but just to state how I feel, so get ready, everyone. Ready? For all the things that this film does incredibly well, to a point where even as a casual fan, I understand the love that it gets from the fandom, I don't find Empire Strikes Back to be as good as A New Hope. I'll give a few nitpicks before I explain my bigger problem with this film. There's already the underdeveloped love story between Han and Leia that I talked about earlier. There's the fact that Yoda is kind of mean when he first meets Luke, appearing to be kind of unwilling to train someone who could possibly defeat the Empire and save the galaxy. And the scene where the Millennium Falcon hides in the part of a Star Destroyer ship that is conveniently undetected by their trackers because Han conveniently knows where the spot is. So seeing as they're only nitpicks, if you were to ask me what my biggest problem with Empire Strikes Back is, what should be strong character developments are completely undermined by the most ineffectual, unenterprising, and dissociated presentation of story events with no consequence in the entire trilogy. Allow me to explain myself, so I avoid hate comments. So you know how in A New Hope there were story events that had the heroes go out and save the day while at the same time have them lose something, right? Well, in Empire Strikes Back, I see characters lose things throughout the story, but I don't feel it, either because what they lose isn't too bad, or gets fixed by the end of the film, or in some cases, immediately after it's lost. To start off with, a small example. There's a plot point where Han and the rest of the heroes on board the Falcon go to Cloud City, on the planet Bespin, to seek help from Lando Calrissian, an old friend of Han who lost the Falcon to him in a bet.
What are you doing here?
Repairs. I thought you could help me out.
What have you done to my ship?
Your ship? Hey, remember, you lost her to me fair and square.
When they arrive, C-3PO stumbles into a control room where he is shot by someone off camera, causing him to fall to pieces. Now, instead of maybe having his disappearance cause something like Han or the others to go and find him, maybe discovering something that doesn't feel right about the place, or foreshadow Lando's scam which leads to them being captured by the Empire, it just results in Han and Leia wondering where he is, and then Chewbacca finds him and brings him back. All the difference now is that he's in pieces, and this honestly feels like filler, just to give C-3PO something to do as comic relief. But that's just one of many moments like this. At the very start of the film, Luke goes out to investigate what he thinks is a meteor landing on the planet. We know this to be a droid sent out by the Empire to find where the rebels are hiding, as stated to us in the opening crawl. While investigating, he encounters an abominable snowman-like creature who, instead of welcoming him to the Himalayas and offering him a snow cone, makes him fall off his tauntaun, knocking him out and dragging him into a cave presumably to eat him. Luke breaks free of where he's in prison, but instead of killing the snowman and staying inside the warmer cave during a blizzard, he goes out where he nearly freezes to death before Han shows up in the nick of time to keep him warm until tomorrow when the rebels go out to find him. The only plot-relevant moment to come from this scene is when Luke is being told by Obi-Wan to go and find Yoda, but because Luke is ultimately saved and nothing comes out of him nearly dying other than a few bruises, I feel like you could have just had Luke see Obi-Wan's words of guidance in some dream while he is asleep inside the Rebel base, and it wouldn't change anything. One could argue it's so Luke can find out about the Empire's droid landing, but he never discovers it because he's attacked before he can investigate it properly, and even then, the droid is discovered anyway by the Rebels after they've rescued Luke, so that whole scene was basically danger for the sake of danger. When the Empire attacks the Rebel base on Hoth, we see a large number of Rebel fighters die in the onslaught while the rest are barely able to escape, and while it should feel emotionally distressing having lost so many of those fighting on the good side, we never see the rest of the Rebels until the very end of the film when they are reunited with the main characters, where despite losing a lot of their fighters, there still looks to be a good chunk of Rebel ships left, thus adding to how we haven't really taken in how many Rebels have died, so there's no real emotional investment, not to mention seeing how much they've set up in their base with technology and supplies only to leave so much behind when they have to escape, but still having about the same amount of technology left on their ships. Like, where do the Rebels and the Empire get the money for their resources? Can they apply for loans? Is there a planet or system with an industry called Star Loans? Because I want to find out about that. And maybe I'll ask George. Another example involves a character that I've not mentioned much, that being the new character, Lando. Not because I think he's a bad character or anything, I think he's really cool. He shares the same charisma as Han, not only with more class and charm in his words, his costume is good, and Billy D. Williams does a great job of portraying him. But the reason I haven't mentioned him much is for one reason. His mere existence makes the loss of Han less impactful. What I mean by that is, Han is shown to fly the Millennium Falcon with a skill not many other pilots can achieve with how risky and daring his flying is. So when we see him get frozen in the carbonite, we're supposed to feel like we've lost not just a fun character, but a vital asset to the Rebels. But then Lando helps Leia and the others escape by helping with flying the Falcon with what looks to be the same skill as Han. Which makes sense, it was originally his ship, but if he could fly it just as well as Han could, it's almost like they could get on about the same as before without Han. So when Han is frozen, while we lose a character, we don't lose an asset of the Rebels, further implementing the lack of loss I mentioned before. But that whole factor builds onto what is probably the biggest story event in the film with no consequence, which is when Luke travels to go and rescue his friends. While training under Yoda, Luke gets a vision of his friends being brutally slaughtered by Vader and the Empire. This is ultimately a trap set by Vader to get Luke to come to him and try and turn him evil, which Yoda and Obi-Wan try to explain to Luke by saying this was a vision of his future, stating that if he was to go and save them now when he isn't complete with his training, he would ruin everything that they fought for. Now this should be a great setup because it creates conflict on what path to go down. Does he try and save his friends while he isn't fully prepared for fighting Vader, or does he stay and master his abilities at the cost of the only friends he has left in his life? Except when it doesn't create conflict, when Luke goes to rescue them and nearly everyone manages to ultimately escape, with the worst case scenario being the Han situation I mentioned before, and Luke losing his hand in the fight with Vader. Which is brutal, but once Luke escapes, he gets a new robotic hand when they reunite with the Rebels later. All these events feel slightly empty to a point where it feels like I'm watching it for the sake of following the characters rather than both the characters and the story. And dare I say it, it feels like a stage setup to get Luke and Vader in a fight for no other reason than to deliver that plot twist. Gonna get massive hate for this. Alright. Having given the film a severely harsh criticism, I'll end on a positive note. Empire Strikes Back is still the same fantastic film with iconic moment after iconic moment that fans love it for. I mean, I didn't even mention how much darker this film gets compared to the first film in its tone. A New Hope had its dark moments, but the Rebels getting annihilated, Han Solo in the torture device, Luke losing his hand, Empire officers mercilessly killed having done the slightest thing wrong. Like, these all firmly establish the film's more mature tone and doesn't hold back from the more adult themes while still being watchable to kids. It's the most beloved of the original trilogy and the magnum opus for sci-fi films and TV series for adults and kids. And while I don't personally enjoy it as much as A New Hope, I can't deny the things it does right, and I still have fun every time I see it. So having said all of that, can I redeem myself with Episode 6, Return of the Jedi? I don't know.
Lord Vader, this is an unexpected pleasure. We're honored by your presence.
You may dispense with the pleasantries, Commander. I'm here to put you back on schedule.
I assure you, Lord Vader, my men are working as fast as they can.
Perhaps I can find new ways to motivate them.
I tell you, this station will be operational as planned.
The Emperor does not share your optimistic appraisal of the situation.
But he asks the impossible. I need more men.
Then perhaps you can tell him when he arrives.
The Emperor's coming here?
That is correct, Commander. And he is most displeased with your apparent lack of progress.
We shall double our efforts.
I hope so, Commander, for your sake. The Emperor is not as forgiving as I am.
Han is still frozen in carbonite and in the hands of the grotesque and lazy Jabba the Hutt, a giant slug monster who Han owed a large debt that he never paid off. Having now properly trained himself in the Force, complete with a new lightsaber constructed by himself, Luke sets out with Leia, Lando, R2-D2, C-3PO and Chewbacca to rescue him from the clutches of Jabba and Boba Fett, a bounty hunter from the last film who assisted Vader in capturing Solo to take to Jabba. All the while, the Empire is in the midst of building a second Death Star more powerful than the last one. While the project itself is overlooked by Darth Vader's master, the Emperor, the two of them create one final ploy to try and turn Luke to the dark side once and for all, who is conflicted at the thought of fighting Darth Vader again, who he now knows is his father. So it's up to the rebels to destroy the Death Star Mark II by taking out the shield generator on the planet Endor with assistance from the planet's residents, the Ewoks, tiny bear people who not only want to defend their home, but follow the commands of C-3PO, who they mistake as some divine being.
Trito Dogra, Isoyoto Amuno Noka.
Do you understand anything they're saying?
Oh, yes, Master Luke. Remember that I am fluent in over 6 million forms of
What are you telling them?
Hello, I think. I could be mistaken. They're using a very primitive dialect, but I do believe they think I am some sort of god.
The first thing I can praise this film for is its use of other characters besides the main heroes. And what I mean by that is actually using characters that aren't Luke, Leia, Han and Chewbacca. C-3PO, for example, was never fully utilised in the last two films and only ever amounted to being more than just comic relief in how much he complained about the dangers of specific missions or his bickering with R2-D2. However, in this film, his fluency in over 6 million languages comes into play as he translates what Jabba is saying to R2-D2 when they go to his palace for the first time as part of the plan to rescue Han, and later on is able to communicate with the Ewoks, telling them the story of the last two films, making him feel like he's involved in the story. In terms of tone, it's actually something that is criticised a lot about this film, which I can kind of understand. When Empire Strikes Back went to such a distance to be as dark as possible for its adult audiences while still being accessible to younger audiences, it's probably disappointing to see when it suddenly goes to a more comedic, more kid-friendly tone, mainly with the introduction of the Ewoks being able to take on the full might of the Stormtroopers despite being cuddly bears. I totally get that, but honestly, I don't really have a problem with this tonal shift. While it is kind of ridiculous that teddy bears with sticks and rocks are able to take down soldiers capable of killing rebellion soldiers, need I remind you that we're in a universe where everyone is able to automatically understand a growling walking carpet, certain people can lift rocks with their minds, and artificial intelligence is completely standard in droids despite taking place a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. So realism is kind of non-existent from a certain point of view. Plus, it's not like the film is completely devoid of dark moments, because there are. The scene where Luke and the others escape Jabba's palace by blasting and slicing his guards up, and then strangling Jabba with the chains that he used to keep Leia close to him. Very brutal. The attack on the planet Endor, seeing the Ewoks viciously attacked by the Empire, also very brutal. Not to mention, this is the film where Luke faces his ultimate conflict of emotions, where he has to fight his own father to save the galaxy. To talk about that part of the film specifically, it is masterfully done. Like, the mere sight of Luke, Darth Vader and the Emperor in that one throne room is dripping with atmosphere. Like, even though there's a war going on outside the Death Star Mark II with the Rebels and the rest of the heroes being just as vital to saving the galaxy, it is very clear that these three are at a level of power far beyond what the Rebels can comprehend. Mark Hamill brings out the optimism we know Luke for, but also being someone who's mastered the waves of the Force and is now a real Jedi Knight, which is so satisfying to see considering how far his character has come. James Earl Jones brings the dark, authoritative voice to Vader we've enjoyed throughout the rest of the films, and jumps between the lines of following the Emperor's commands without question to simply wanting the best for his son, and he does that very well. But the show stealer, to me, is without a doubt Ian McDiarmid as the Emperor. Every word that he says and the way that he says it sounds so devious and empowering to a point where, even though he's just sitting in his throne room or just slowly wandering around, his mere presence makes him the one in control of everything, and it's probably my favourite part of the film. Other great moments being the speed bike scene on Endor, the sad but peaceful death of Yoda followed by a pep talk from Obi-Wan to Luke, and the whole third act final battle. What is also done very well is we, as an audience, now have a fully established knowledge of what the Force is capable of doing, while still introducing fresh ideas, as demonstrated by the Emperor and his phenomenal ability to charge your laptop.
If you will not be turned, you will be destroyed. Young.
And it's through Luke's rage and aggression of wanting the war to be over, as well as his overwhelming emotions that come from fighting his father, that make him vulnerable to turning to the dark side, which goes to show that even as a fully realised Jedi, the dark side still has its methods of luring you in. So when Luke overcomes the emotions and manages to bring out the good in Darth Vader at the very last minute to defeat the Emperor at the cost of his own, we feel sorry for Luke for losing his father, but proud that he overcame the odds to turn him to the light side. There's also one more positive I want to say, but it involves me talking about the biggest problem of this film, which I will get into after I talk about the two nitpicks that I have with this film. The first one being an issue that's actually spread into the other two films. When Luke is talking with Leia about fighting Vader again, Luke, and by extension us, the audience, learn that Leia is Luke's twin sister. As while that does explain how Leia was able to sense Luke's cry for help at the end of Empire Strikes Back, it makes it incredibly uncomfortable thinking back at all the scenes where the two of them kissed.
I know. Somehow, I've always known.
And that makes it extra weird. Second one being around the Death Star Mark II. Now, I have no problem with them building a second Death Star. I mean, if it worked the first time but was vulnerable to one tiny flaw, why not try it again and try to overcome that flaw? Also, to me, it's kind of funny seeing the kind of incomplete design of the Death Star, feeling like the Empire are just out of patience with the Rebels and want to wipe them out as soon as possible. My issue with it being that while they build a shield generator to protect any weak spots, they make the dumbest decision of putting it on Endor, making it vulnerable to invasion, which is ultimately what happens. So, did they run out of money for building space to put it on the Death Star? Or was it just meant to be a temporary force field until the ship was completely built? Either answer would be dumb, but again, this is just nitpicky. So if they're just nitpicks, what's my biggest problem with this film? Sadly, it's while Return of the Jedi is incredible with its story and character moments and epically concluding the original Star Wars trilogy, it really does take its time in actually getting to that point, as it follows the trend of Empire Strikes Back by giving us the most inconsequential beginnings of the entire trilogy, Jabba's palace. Now, I understand the premise of what this scene is meant to show. It's to rescue Han Solo from the clutches of Jabba the Hutt and make it back to the Rebel fleet, but it feels like there's no consequence or resolution that comes out of it. Han, for instance, is freed by the carbonite but is blind, making me think, oh cool, it's like they rescued a friend, but he's lost his skills of being a good fighter with a laser and being able to fly the Falcons, so they're still a man down. But no, Luke, Leia and Lando manage to handle Jabba's people just fine on their own, and not only does Han get his eyesight back, but accidentally kills Boba Fett while still blind, which kind of makes you wonder why Boba Fett is seen as such a cool character in this community when he went out like that. So with no consequences, with no character changing moments or plot changing moments, you could put in any other scenario of Han being rescued and it would change nothing as it's never mentioned or made relevant to what's going on. It's like you're on a detour and then you see the Empire again and think, oh yeah, that's right, they're meant to be the main threat. The scenes simply exist to stretch the runtime, give us different aliens to look at, and demonstrate Luke's now current skills as a fully fledged Jedi, which I'll admit is still kind of cool. Had this kind of storytelling spread out across the whole film, I would say it's as bad as Empire Strikes Back. However, that is not the case, as from the moment they leave Tatooine and we see the Emperor arrive on board the Death Star Mark II, the film gets so much better. Every story beat onward has the upside with consequences technique that A New Hope managed to do, and thus making me more engaged with what is going on. Luke, for example, helps with winning the war and is now fully trained and experienced in the Force, but he has lost both his master Yoda to old age and Vader in the sacrifice he did to save his son, where Vader also redeems himself by killing the Emperor and wins the care of his son, but also loses his own life in the process. To which there is another upside as he manages to come back as a Force ghost alongside Obi-Wan and Yoda. The rebels gain the aid of the Ewoks fighting alongside them, but that sadly brings the war to their forest, causing some of it to be destroyed and the death of some of the Ewoks, so overall it brings out a much more engaging story in its last 2/3 than Empire Strikes Back did as a whole. Which is why I think Return of the Jedi is not just a great conclusion that ended the trilogy on a high note, but also a better film than Empire Strikes Back. So for those keeping track, A New Hope is my favourite, Return of the Jedi is my second favourite, and Empire Strikes Back is my third favourite. I am going to get slanted for this. I cannot believe I just said this in a podcast. As I conclude, I want to talk about the presentation and the music for all three films. The original Star Wars trilogy are gorgeous looking films. A sticking point with other trilogies is that while the technology and budget of the films get bigger and bigger, it also makes it harder to re-watch the earlier films as they run the risk of making them look worse. Whereas with these films, each film looks so amazing that you don't notice it at first glance, so you don't care. It keeps the same look while knowing where to push its technology. Not to mention the lengths that it goes to look so good with mostly practical effects. As they were in times where they didn't have full access to green screens or computer animated effects and had to work off of what they could physically build for the set, the cooperation of everyone to create such stunning set pieces and action scenes should not be overlooked. Yeah, they will age as time goes on, but their efforts surely won't. The actors all do a great job as well. To talk about those I didn't already mention, Harrison Ford as Han Solo does a great job at playing the risk-taking smuggler. The late Alec Guinness as Obi-Wan Kenobi does a brilliant job for his time in the first half of the film and brief moments in the other two. Anthony Daniels does great as C-3PO, the late Peter Mayhew does great with the growling and body acting of Chewbacca, and the late Carrie Fisher does a phenomenal job as the gentle but ready for battle Princess Leia. Even if the dialogue they all have to work with at points is very cheesy.
That's a good story. I think you just can't bear to let a gorgeous guy like me out of your sight.
I don't know where you get your delusions, laser brain.
The score composed and conducted by John Williams is as iconic as the opening song used in the first opening crawl. It can be whimsical, unnerving, grand, upsetting, action-packed and intimidating. The opening tune, the battle themes, the escape themes, the music that plays when Luke looks at the sunset on Tatooine, and the Imperial March theme of Darth Vader are some of the most recognisable from this soundtrack, where you only have to listen to a few notes and you can already tell what's going on. All of these factors that I've just stated lead to what is definitely a flawed but amazing batch of sci-fi films unlike any that came before or after it. And that would be where I would have left it had this actually stretched out to an hour. Because my original plan for this was to stretch out to over an hour, and I wasn't exactly sure if it would stretch out to an hour, because you can only say like so many words in an hour, so I wanted to make sure that while I wrote a lot, I didn't want to write too much in order to make sure I could squeeze it into 1 hour. Turns out I didn't have to worry at all, simply because every single time I read it at the speed of sound. At a speed uncatchable to the human ears. To a point where it's now... To a point where it ended up being just over 42 minutes. And I don't feel like I can do that for a podcast like this, where I planned it to be about an hour long. and then it just turns out to miss the mark by a whole 18 minutes. So what I'll do is, for this, I'll basically going to be talking for 8 minutes, so I can bring this up to like a solid 50, because I feel like 50 is more of a forgiving number making this than with 42. Basically, be telling you what's going to happen for the later episodes of this. So, as I mentioned towards the start of this, I'm going to be looking at the Star Wars prequel trilogy next. So that'll be Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, Episode 2, Attack of the Clones, and Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. After that, I will look at the sequels. That will be Episode 7, The Force Awakens, Episode 8, The Last Jedi, and Episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker. I know that I said I'm only like a casual fan of Star Wars, and here I am saying that all my first like 3 episodes are going to be entirely focused on Star Wars, and that's not why I'm doing them. I'm not doing them because I'm a massive Star Wars fan. I'm a fan of Star Wars, but not a massive fan. I'm doing them because I feel like it's a good solid start. The same way that someone would start this kind of thing with like a familiar series of films, like something done by Disney, something done by Pixar. Anything really, just a good solid start to the podcast, which began with me harshly criticising Empire Strikes Back to probably a bunch of Empire Strikes Back fans. What a way to get them on my side, am I right, guys? But after I've done the prequel trilogy, and then after I've done the sequel trilogy, what I do afterwards will be entirely up to you guys. That'll be the first instance where you guys will get to have your say on what film it is that I get to watch next. So when the sequel episode comes out, at the end of it, I will ask you what films you want me to watch. Yeah, I won't ask right now, as right now my mindset is currently set on getting the Star Wars films watched and out of the way for this. But once I'm done with those films, I will then ask you the question of what film do you want me to watch, from which you'll be able to make your suggestions, presumably on the Instagram page, wherever you see like a post of my podcast logo, of like my podcast art that advertises my podcast. That will be an opportunity for you to comment down below what film you would like me to watch, because I feel like I could get away with using comments in this, because I feel like this is a new podcast. My audience is probably going to be small. It's probably just going to be like a small audience, because that's the way every sort of podcast works out to begin with. They get like a smaller audience, and they get bigger and bigger. I just hope I can win the audience back, having harshly criticised Empire Strikes Back. Oh boy. But what I hope to achieve from the podcast overall, because I've been planning, hoping to do something like this for ages. I considered doing one for my YouTube channel, but I feel like all 95 of my subscribers wouldn't really click onto that, particularly if it doesn't click with the YouTube algorithm. But a podcast where I talk about my passion about films in a professional manner is something that I've wanted to do for a little bit. I tried doing something like this with the college radio station back at the college I used to go to, and the system was terrible. It had one speaker that was incredibly quiet and was only ever used in the canteen, where there was so much noise of either people talking or a completely different speaker played by the by the people who served our food. Just listening to a different radio station. So it ultimately amounted to nothing for 3 years. It was fun to do it with my college mates. It was really fun to do it like that. But it never really amounted to anything a professional out of it. So now that I'm at university, where I've heard that the radio station here specifically is very good. Hopefully I can reach out to a bigger audience than people in a canteen. That is if people, actually tune in to listen to my podcast. I'm doubting myself as I like this. I don't mean to doubt myself. I'm just very nervous. That's why you can hear me stuttering and mumbling a lot. That's actually the reason why I wrote sort of a bigger sort of script for this, rather than writing down notes and talking naturally about how I feel about these films, because I tried doing that to begin with. I tried recording me naturally talking about these films with nothing but notes down. It resulted in just about 100 stutters, 100 mumbles, to me completely freezing and not saying a word for a good solid minute or two. So I was like, I'm not having fun with this. I need a more professional idea of what I'm going to say in order to make me sound more professional to you guys. But yeah, what did you guys think of this? Not only do I want to hear your suggestions on films I want to watch when I ask for them when I get to the sequel video, but I also want to hear your thoughts on this podcast. Did you like the sound of it? Do you think I need to slow down a little bit? I think that's one thing I should probably prioritise in improving this, isn't that I need to slow down with my writing, and then I might actually be able to get this podcast at an hour's length with what I write. But yeah, what do you guys think of this? Let me know. Let me know in a comment somewhere on Instagram. You can follow me on Instagram if you want. But yeah, this has been Luke Carruthers recording for Escaping Through the Lens on Utter Radio, and I will see you next week. Goodbye.